Hello, grade 12s, and welcome to the first lesson. Today we're going to be discussing the Black Power movement, and we will be discussing what is Black Power, why was it necessary. We're going to be looking at individuals such as Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X, as well as the Black Panther movement, or the Black Panther Party. So, let's get started. Now, the reasons that the Black Power movement was necessary was that many African people became very dissatisfied with the civil rights movement. And although the civil rights movement had achieved some gains by gaining civil rights and the Voting Act, the economic situations that many African Americans still faced in their day-to-day lives had not improved, and therefore a great majority of African Americans started moving towards the Black Power movement. And they moved towards this Black Power movement because they lived in ghettos in very poor conditions. They were unemployed. They were paid very low wages. There was still a great deal of police brutality, and this really encouraged people to move towards the Black Power movement because it encouraged a more assertive and more aggressive type of protest. Before we can really look at all the rest of this topic, we first need to understand what is the Black Power movement, what is Black Power. And I want you to understand that those who supported the Black Power movement believed in Black self-pride. Black is beautiful became a very prominent and well-known saying. It promoted Black interests in the society. It encouraged Black self-help, Black people helping Black people. It encouraged people to defend themselves against racial oppression, and it fostered a very distinctive Black culture. It encouraged people to be proud of their culture and to share it openly. Many supported a self-sufficient Black economy idea, and I want you to understand that the Black Power movement was not an organization. It was just this belief that African American people, Black people, needed to become more proud and self-aware of the power that that pride has. And it was just a movement away from this non-violent protest that had been created by the civil rights movement and moving towards being more assertive and more aggressive in their protests. But because this wasn't a formal organization, some of the people who followed these ideas had very different emphasis and ideas that they put to the public. And we're going to be looking at Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael. So, Stokely Carmichael was born in Trinidad in 1941, and he moved to New York when he was 11. He was part of the civil rights movement, and he took part in the freedom rides, and he was actually jailed for 49 days. However, in 1966, he became the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or the SNCC, and he moved the organization towards the Black Power direction. And to do this, he excluded whites from the organization in 1967. He believed that white people were the problem, that it was white people who had caused oppression and segregation, and that they cannot be part of the solution because they were the problem. He also believed that non-violence was not working and that people should abandon it. However, in 1967, he was expelled from the SNCC and he joined the Black Panther Party. When he joins the Black Panther Party, he becomes an honorary prime minister of the party. And he moves this Black Panther Party away from being willing to work with white people. However, once again in 1967, he is expelled from the Black Panther Party. In 1969, Stokely moved to Guinea in Africa, and he renounced his affiliation with the Black Panther Party because of their willingness to work with whites. I want you to remember that he believed that whites were the heart of the problem, and therefore this willingness to work with white people, to him it was a betrayal. However, he became a committed Pan-Africanist, and this was because of his belief that Africans should unite. He believed that Africa was the home for Africans and that all Africans should return to Africa. He believed that it is only in Africa where Africans will be able to assert themselves and not be dominated by racist whites. The next person we need to discuss is Malcolm X. Now, Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little, and he was born in Nebraska in 1925. When he was 6 years old, his father died, and at least one of his uncles had been lynched by racist white people. In addition, when he turned 13, his mother had a mental breakdown, and she was sent to an asylum, which left Malcolm and his 6 siblings without any parents, and they were then sent to foster homes. However, they were not homes together. They were sent to separate foster homes. By the age of 18, he had become involved in many criminal activities, and by 1946, he was arrested and found guilty of theft, and he was given 8 to 10 years prison sentence. While he was in prison, he read a lot, and some of his family members in prison introduced him to Islam. He then converted to Islam, and on his release, he joined the Nation of Islam and became one of their ministers. The Nation of Islam was a party, and they believed that blacks were superior to whites and that whites were actually devils. The Nation of Islam believed that black people should not mix with white people at all, and that they should create a black state within the US until they could go back to Africa. Malcolm X very strongly was against the civil rights movement, and he criticized them often. However, after his pilgrimage to Mecca, Malcolm X toned down his hatred of the civil rights movement, and he left the Nation of Islam. However, he was assassinated on the 21st of February 1965, and we think that he was assassinated by the Nation of Islam because he was subject to threats from the Nation of Islam when he left them, and he was very critical of the leader of the Nation of Islam, as he had multiple affairs with young secretaries within the organization. And only a week after his leaving the Nation of Islam was he killed. Now, Malcolm X, his legacy is in his ability to raise people's self-esteem, to encourage people to have self-confidence, and to stand up against racism and oppression. And Malcolm X's greatest ability was his ability to connect with people. He spoke in such a way that people hung on his every word. And it is because of this that we can definitely say that he was one of the fundamental leaders within the Black Power movement. Then we need to look at the Black Panther Party. Now, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was its original name. However, it later lost the for self-defense part and it became known as just the Black Panther Party. It was founded by Huey Newton and Bobby Sale in Oakland, California in 1966. The initial aim of the Black Panther Party was to promote protection of blacks from police brutality. And they took advantage of this old Californian law that stated that people were allowed to carry weapons, loaded weapons, as long as they weren't pointing it at anyone and as long as the weapon was openly displayed. You could not hide the weapon at all. And it is because of this that there are a lot of pictures where you see the leaders and the members of the Black Panther Party actually openly carrying weapons. If you want to see an example of this, please go to page 202 in your book. There is a photo of the two founding members of the party outside their offices, heavily armed. Now, they encouraged what they called the 10-point program. And these points, some of them were very reasonable, while others were more unreasonable or debatable. And some of these, point 3, for example, called for reparation and compensation for slavery. Point 6 called for black men to be exempt from military service. They believed that black people shouldn't have to fight for people who had oppressed them and who had been racist towards them. Point 7 called for black people to form armed groups for self-defense against police brutality and oppression. And point 8 called for the release of all imprisoned blacks who they believed had not been given a fair and impartial trial, and therefore they should be released because they were found guilty just because of their skin color. That was the belief they held. The Black Panthers were not originally black nationalists. They were prepared to accept and work with white people. But this changes somewhat in 1966 when Stokely Carmichael becomes the honorary prime minister. And under Carmichael, the Black Panther Party becomes black nationalist and anti-white. However, it is for a very short period because by 1967, Carmichael had been expelled from the movement, and the movement started to refer to themselves as Revolutionary International Movement. And this movement was very socialist. They believed that the wealth should be spread equally among people, that there should not be any class systems. And I want you to understand that the Black Panther Party was not just the socialist movement. In order for them to raise money, they were involved in many criminal activities. They dealt drugs, they pimped women out, so they dealt in prostitution, and they actually extorted people to raise money. Extortion means to blackmail people. And in addition, they were often involved in altercations with the police. It caused about 50 deaths, and the co-founder, Huey Newton, was actually convicted of murdering a police officer, and he wrote a book about this. He was extremely proud of his actions. However, the Black Panther Party was very active in what they called survival programs. They were very active in the African American communities through these programs, and they offered services to these communities like free medical clinics, self-defense classes, first aid classes. They offered drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers. They had classes on politics and economics, and they had what was one of their most popular programs, which was the Free Breakfast for Children program, which ensured that children went to school on full stomachs. And in this way, they really did look after the Black communities. At its height, the Black Panther Party attracted the attention of the FBI, and the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover actually called the Black Panther Party the greatest threat to the internal security of the USA. And this was because it encouraged Black communities to stand up against oppression, to not just allow it to slide by. They encouraged communities to arm themselves and to rise up against this oppression. And because of that, it was an interest of the FBI to keep them under surveillance. Now, the short and long-term gains of this Black Power movement there are a lot, but some of the ones that I want to bring to your attention is short-term gains. They caused racial pride amongst Black people. Local Black political groups were established. Many Black voters were mobilized and encouraged to support Black candidates, and Black studies programs were introduced at universities and colleges. Long-term goals, I want you to understand that this increased self-confidence and self-esteem among Black people, the pride that had been created during this movement, was both a short and a long-term goal. It still is prevalent up till today, despite the fact that the Black Power movement has actually died off. It encouraged solidarity among African American people, and it allowed social justice groups to be established. They actually helped many of these social justice groups to be established. And what it ultimately did was it encouraged a greater cultural tolerance in the USA. It encouraged people to start to recognize and appreciate the cultural differences between one another. Right, grade 12s, that brings us to the end of this lesson. If you do have any questions, please feel free to send the question on the group. We can discuss it there. I would like you to please read pages 198 to 211, and then to do the activities. Activity 2, page 202, Activity 3, page 207, and just the source-based section of the questions on 213 to 215. Grade 12s, please ask if you don't understand anything. I want you to understand that this section, the Black Power movement, is part of paper 1. So your paper 1 will be structured. The questions that you will be able to answer is you can choose source-based questions, either Cuba or Black Power, or the essays which you have already completed those sections for, which is China and the civil rights movement. So that wraps up your paper 1 work. And then from the next section, we are going to be focusing on paper 2. Please, 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 please make sure you do these activities. Once you are finished with the activities, send me proof, a private message on WhatsApp that you have done the work. Send me a picture of the work, and I will then send you the answers to this work. Thank you very much, and I hope you guys are staying safe. I'm praying for you every single day. I hope to see you guys very soon. I miss you guys. I am not cut out to be an online teacher. I want to see you in front of me. I want to have that interaction with you, and I miss you a lot. I hope you stay safe. Bye.